This sermon begins with urgency. Lazarus is sick. Mary and Martha send word. It's just 2 miles away to their friend. And Jesus, the one who had done all these miracles, lingers. And we have an interesting word here. It says, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. There's a lateness to Jesus. And we're going to find that in this passage, John, the Lord, the wonderful message here, is something for us about when God is late. And there's something about when God weeps. There's something about when God calls. There's something about what God does to our human tunes. Jesus, the Lord, John want us to hear this. And the first thing they want us to hear is that when he delays, you would think, well, it's kind of contradictory. It says he loved them, and so what would you think? You would think he hurried the 2 miles there. Certainly when I got a call from Mark Smith, Merle Smith's son, telling me that my beloved friend Merle was on his deathbed, I immediately booked an airplane for. Why did I hurry? Because I loved him. But what does this say? This says, because he loved him, he lingered for 2 days. So what we have to get from this, strangely enough, is that the delay is not an absence of love, but out of love. And that can be really hard to understand. It can be especially hard to understand if we ourselves have been waiting and waiting and waiting, and then the time has come and gone, and there's an over and done with, there's a decayness, there's a permanence that this is over. This isn't about being on the edge of disaster, it's being on the aftermath of disaster. And we wonder, what does this mean that God, who always acts in love, here is delaying because of love? Well, I have a thought. I hope it's helpful. But it's about a man who was with a friend. And the friend had a heart attack in the house. They called 911. And as they waited and they waited and they waited, the man got very fidgety and needed to go out on the porch and left his friend with his wife. And he waited and he waited and he waited and waited. Finally the ambulance came. Finally, the ambulance came, and they took him, and he was, why did it take so long? Why were they so late? They were supposed to be faster and faster. Several days later, you know what he found out? He found out that the dispatcher had sent them through. The porch, and we're always. But I am saying that God is the one who made time, that God is outside of time and inside of time, and he always manages it from where he is, outside, inside, in a way that is for our good and his glory. Always, 100%. And we find out that Jesus didn't come when Lazarus and Mary and Martha most wanted or thought they most needed. He came when Jesus thought they most needed. Not when they most wanted, but when he determined that they most needed. You see, they didn't need at this point in his ministry another medical marvel. What they needed was an undeniable resurrection miracle. You see, we can get healed all the day long, but we're still going to die. And what we need is a miracle that has to do with death. And that's what Jesus, in love, lingered so he could bring us a greater miracle than the miracle of healing, the miracle of resurrection life to speak to us. So that's the first movement of the story. When God is late, it's because he loves us. as strange as that may be, we hold on to the fact that he is always operating for our good and his glory. The second thing that we turn to is how Martha comes to Jesus. She comes and says, if you had been here. It sounds like an accusation, doesn't it? It sounds like something, if you're dressed in grief and your heart is rended, that's the kind of thing you would say. But I wonder, and I invite you to wonder about this too, if it was less an accusation and more a confession. In other words, Jesus, I know who you are. I know the power in you. I've seen you heal people. I know that if you had been here, you could have, and indeed you would have, because of our relationship with you and your love, you would have healed Lazarus. And maybe she's a little confined that Jesus had to be on the spot for any power to be displayed, and that he had delayed, and now the time for his operative power was over. But she says, I know that if you had been here, my brother would not have died, because you would have healed him. And then we find that Jesus says to Martha, Lazarus will rise again. And she responds with a kind of common belief at the time about a resurrection at the last day, at the day of judgment when history wraps up. Everybody goes up, stands before God, the judgment seat of God. And not all the Jews believe this. In fact, the Sadducees, which we are familiar with in the New Testament, did not believe this at all. But Mary says, I believe this general understanding that at the end of time, everyone will rise up. And then Jesus says to her, Mary, Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. I am the one who has the beauty, the power, the timing, the love. Life and light itself is not something I just do, but it's something I am. And it all generates, and I'm the fount of it for everyone. And then he says, do you believe this? And she answers, I believe you. Actually, she says, I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God, come into the world. But what she means is, I believe you, because he's not asking her for a doctrinal affirmation. He's asking about her trust in his character and in his power. I believe you. It's interesting to go through the Bible and find the questions that God asks, and to take them not just on the page, but for us. And so here's that question, not just for Martha, but for you and me. Do you believe this? That Jesus is the one you can trust as the source of all power and light and life and love and beauty? Do you? Well, what happens next is that the other sister, Mary, comes at the behest of Martha. And when she goes out, she meets Jesus in the way once again and says the exact 5 words in Greek. But if you had been here, but if you had been here. And Jesus sees her weeping. And he sees the people weeping. And then the text tells us that he was disturbed. But that's a pretty gentle word. The word in other places in the literature of the day had to do with a war horse with flaring nostrils that grunts and is incensed and ready for battle. He's that bothered. He's uncouthly breathing and flaring and upset at the fact that there is death at hand. Well, this is great because it tells us that Jesus doesn't just stand at a distance, but he rides the horse of fury into the death situation. He doesn't stand on the outside looking in. He comes in and he feels with us. And before he tries to fix it, he stands with us in the sorrow and the upset and the grief. And then it says he moves from there to himself weeping. The shortest verse in the Bible. So if you're on a memory program, this is where you want to start. Bible Memory 101, start with this verse. Jesus wept. So now you all have memorized the verse. I'm sure you can get it. But Jesus wept. And what that tells us is that Jesus minutes, maybe 20 minutes, I don't know. But in a matter of minutes, he's going to bring some resolution here. And he could have said, let's just move along. But he doesn't move along. He comes in and he stands with and he weeps. One of the church fathers says that when Jesus weeps, he weeps the very tears of God. Isn't that beautiful? That this is God. This is Jesus. The tears of God. You see, it's not an illusion when there's grief and suffering. And it's not a matter of if you just screw up enough faith and handle it right or have the right kind of faith, then you're not going to have grief. No, Jesus himself comes into the grief and he doesn't move on. He stands with us there. There's something about him saying, before I try to fix this, I need to just be with you. Don't you want to hear that? Before he comes and just says, I'm going to fix you, I'm going to rather be with you before I fix you. So Jesus comes that way. And there are two words for tears and two kinds of tears. One is the wailing kind of tear. In many cultures of the world, the community vocalizes loud wailing and gives expression to your grief for you. And kind of hearing that and knowing that people are sharing in the pain of that and vocalizing it and listening to it is some kind of solace. But then there's the kind that is just a silent bed with the tears rolling down the face. And when it says that Jesus wept, it wasn't that kind of theater, therapeutic theater. It was the kind that just rolls down his face. So there, I want you to see Jesus, the Son of God, in the middle of the situation, just quietly, with tears running down his face. And he's there to be with us before he fixes us, although he will do that too. Now, I have different kinds of weeks. Some weeks I have enough time to memorize the sermon, and other weeks it's like a football game. They didn't lose, the clock just ran out. Erroneous. So we have something of when God is late, something of when God weeps, and now we have something of when God calls. There's a detail that John mentions twice, and he doesn't repeat things by accident. He says Lazarus has been dead 4 days. And that matters because they had a belief that the spirit with the body might hang around the body for up to 3 days, trying to kind of revive it, resuscitate it. But by the end of the 3rd day, certainly it's over and done with, and the spirit departs. By the 4th day, the possibility is gone. The physical decay of death is present. And it's made especially plain to us when she says to Jesus, when he says, roll the stone away. But wait, it's a dead man and the body stinketh. John is making sure we understand that this is not a near-death issue. This is a dead death issue. This is not a man in a coma, nor is it a misdiagnosis. It is a 4-day dead matter. And so it's not resuscitation, it's resurrection. And we need to get that firmly in mind. And Jesus prays out loud, not because he needs to, but because he wants to witness to where the power is coming from. And he cries out in a loud voice, it says, but the word is actually a great voice, Lazarus, come out. A great, authoritative, beautiful, sonorous, powerful, loving, personal voice Lazarus, come out. Now, I love this. The early church fathers pointed out that Jesus called out Lazarus by name. And that was a good thing, because if Jesus had simply said, come out, without specifying, every grave in that cemetery would have opened up. I love that. The call is personal. Jesus does not just raise a crowd of humanity. With his name, he calls Lazarus, and with our name, one day he will call us by name. And Lazarus comes out, buried in a burial cloth, shuffling, I imagine. He comes, and Jesus doesn't unwrap him. He turns to the people standing there, and he says, unbind him and let him go. Now, many have made the point that the resurrection is Jesus' work, and the unbinding is our work. That's a way of thinking about the church, and it's pretty neat. The church is about this grace, that people need Jesus, and they need Jesus people. We are Jesus-loved people unwrapping each other. Did you know that? We are Jesus-loved people unwrapping each other. So he tells us something about when God delays, something about when God weeps, and then when God calls. And he also says something about God and our tombs. One of the greatest preachers of the 20th century was a man by the name of Fred Craddock, who was at Emory or Candler School of Theology in Atlanta. And he told a story of walking through a cemetery. And he came across a grave that had a little handmade sign, handwritten, the kind of sign you might stake in a garden to identify a plant. And it had one word on it: temporary. You know, that's probably the most important thing you can say on the other side of John 11 about the grave. Temporary. Not that death is not real. It is. Jesus wept at the tomb. That proves it. He does not pretend otherwise. Not that the grief is not real. He enters it. But the grave is not the last word, because Jesus is the resurrection and the life, and that means wherever he is, death does not get the final call. The story of Lazarus is a sign. It's a sign pointing towards an empty tomb on the other side of Holy Week, and then beyond that to a day when every grave that has ever held anyone we love will be marked by that one word: temporary. Now, some of us here today are probably Mary and Martha. You sent word and God didn't come. Right now or in the past, and you're still mulling that over. And I want to say to you that he didn't come because he loves you. We may not understand it, but it's because he loves us. And some of us are at the tomb. Someone has died. You're standing in front of a stone. And we need to hear this. Jesus calls people out of tombs. He calls you and I. Can you hear the voice quietly coming through this sermon and passage? And some of us are Lazarus in the dark, bound up. And you can hear your name faintly. Maybe you don't know if you have the strength to shuffle towards the voice, but do. It's not a stranger's voice. It is the voice of the one who made you and loves you. So when God waits, it's not absence. So when God weeps, it is not weakness. When God calls, even the dead listen. And let us listen for the word of the Lord and realize that even our graves are temporary. Thanks be to God, we pray.